let's try and get at one of the most important things any philosopher or scientist might need to tell us right now. Something that goes to the heart of our whole crisis as a species. A lot of people have theories about what's wrong with the world, but the insight we'll explore together stands out for two reasons. First, it marks a rare overlap of science, philosophy, and religion or spirituality. Not the typical quantum coconut regression sort of thing, but a genuine overlap. And second, we have so far failed to genuinely apply this insight to the major problems of the world in any significant way. It's an insight still waiting for us to truly understand it and thus to better understand ourselves and our world. An insight that invites us into a transformation most of us aren't expecting. It's something wondrous. Maybe we can start by first acknowledging how crazy our world can seem. Maybe you feel like everyone else is crazy and you're just trying to be sane. Or maybe you feel a little crazy yourself, like your mind has gotten threadbare from all the stresses in your life and in the world. Maybe you feel physically off as well, or you have overt physical ailments. All of that relates in one way or another to our subject matter. When we look around at the problems in our own lives and in the world, we naturally want to do something about it. But what if every attempt to help ourselves or to help the world somehow digs us in a little deeper? What if our best intentions end up perpetuating a pattern of insanity in ways we don't fully sense or understand? Let me give a little trigger warning about the way we'll try and answer those questions. We'll consider a simple and sensitive, aesthetically pleasing scientific account. If you find science confusing, boring, or somehow limited, you needn't fear. Just stick with it and all will become clear. It's okay if something about the discussion seems fuzzy at first. That's a good thing and perfectly natural with philosophically loaded material, even if it's scientifically based. To understand our situation scientifically, we'll turn to the multidisciplinary scientist Gregory Bateson, who gives a precise statement of our present insanity in a talk he offered back in 1970. The philosophical diagnosis of our problem goes back way earlier than 1970. But this talk is perhaps one of the best statements of the problem we can find in all of philosophy or science. In this talk, Bateson points out two interrelated errors in our scientific thinking. The first is an error in Darwinian evolution theory. That error has to do with the unit of survival in natural selection. The original theory was built around the individual, or sometimes the family line, or some other set of related individuals, as the unit of survival. But that view doesn't hold up. Instead, the unit of survival has to include a responsive organism and a responsive environment, and it cannot keep a strong barrier between those. We can make sense of this quite easily because if any organism or group of organisms pursues its own survival, its supposed progress will eventually end up destroying the environment. Any organism that destroys its environment destroys itself. Therefore, we need to change the way we make sense of survival. the habitual notion of survival of the fittest contains an error. The second error Bateson considers is the error we make about the unit of mind. These errors go together, and Bateson helps us to see evolution as a mental process. What is the basic unit of mind? To help us understand the basic unit of mind, Bateson gives a depiction of it. Consider a tree and a man and an axe. We observe that the axe flies through the air and makes certain sorts of gashes in a pre-existing cut in the side of the tree. If now we want to explain this set of phenomena, we shall be concerned with differences in the cut face of the tree, differences in the retina of the man, differences in his central nervous system, differences in the behavior of his muscles, differences in how the axe flies, differences which the axe then makes on the face of the tree. Our explanation will go round and round that circuit. In principle, if you want to explain or understand anything in human behavior, you are always dealing with total circuits. This is the elementary cybernetic thought. This image contains the heart of our personal and global problem, as well as the heart of the solution, because the cybernetic circuit Bateson presents is too small to cut down a tree wisely. Clearly, this loop suffices to describe the killing of a tree, but it does not suffice to describe a healthy mind, a healthy forest, a healthy human, a healthy culture, and a healthy world. For that, we need a much larger circuit, or a complex of circuits. When we look at the circuits we actually use for cutting down trees, they appear clever, but not very wise. We can also note that even the smallest circuit, the narrow and simple one described by Bateson, ultimately transcends the capacity of what we typically identify as consciousness. And it does this as part of transcending the boundaries of what we typically identify as ego or self. Though it does give some indication of the deeper roots of why egos get so possessive over their axes and their trees. That possessiveness is simply an encumbered expression of a profound truth. The basic unit of mind does not involve something a human being thinks inside their skull. We cannot locate the basic unit of mind in a brain, in an ego, or even in a body. Instead, the basic unit of mind includes what we ordinarily separate, as we do when we speak of the organism and its environment, or the DNA inside a cell, or the mind and the body, or the way we separate in practice ideas about sustainability, justice, economics, art, ecology, culture, and so on. Where do you locate your ideas about justice and politics? money and stock markets, mountains and rivers, dolphins, honeybees, sacredness. And if we want to talk about conservation, what is it we think we will conserve? If we want to save a species or promote peace and justice, what does that mean in terms of the way we think about the problem? Something powerful comes through when we also realize that Bateson has here offered an identity between the unit of mind and the unit of survival. It's the same unit. This brings home the idea that evolution is a mental process. Bateson says, this identity between the unit of mind and the unit of evolutionary survival is of very great importance, not only theoretical, but also ethical. If this identity between mental and evolutionary units is broadly right, then we face a number of shifts in our thinking. The very meaning of survival becomes different when we stop talking about the survival of something bounded by the skin and start to think of the survival of the system of ideas in circuit. Habitually, we think of things rather narrowly. This division between mind and body, between organism and environment, leads to seeing ourselves as set against our world. We function as if mind is inside of us, and we therefore see the world as essentially mindless. We do not see our acts as part of our mind, nor do we see cars, trees, whales, and wolves as part of our mind. Mind transcends what we identify in our conscious purposes. But as a matter of bad habit, we follow our own conscious purposes even when we try to restore ecologies or establish justice, let alone when we try to make money or achieve success and fame. And when we follow conscious purposes in our habitual manner, we replicate the style of thinking that creates all our problems in the first place. And thus, against our best intentions, the environment inevitably becomes something we exploit on the basis of those purposes. And we functionally break apart the unit of survival, putting the survival of all of us in peril. We force the earth to absorb the consequences of our ignorance, and the earth has announced that she can absorb no more. This may make some intellectual sense already, maybe a lot of sense, maybe it sounds like something you already agree with or believe. But Bateson recognized the deeper, more revolutionary nature of these insights, which were not personal to him, but rather came from the scientific revolutions of the 20th century. Philosophically speaking, these insights go back much further, but that makes them no less challenging to truly incorporate into ourselves and our culture. And scientists, too, still face this challenge, as do activists of all kinds, and ordinary people of all kinds. Bateson calls us to face the demands of our own scientific and philosophical discoveries in the following lines. If I am right, the whole of our thinking about what we are and what other people are has got to be restructured. This is not funny, and I do not know how long we have to do it in. Nobody knows how long we have under the present system before some disaster strikes us, more serious than the destruction of any group of nations. The most important task today is to learn to think in the new way. Here we have the most important thing laid out: to think in the new way. But Bateson doesn't want anything to do with platitudes here. This has nothing to do with what we call innovation, or thinking outside the box, or becoming a cultural disruptor. In fact, Bateson wants to tell us that all our notions of thinking outside the box do nothing more than perpetuate the box that's making us all crazy. When we try and think outside the box, we end up making the box more capable of destroying the conditions of life. Thus, Bateson explicitly recognized two crucial and related issues: that he himself did not know how to think in the new way, and that it's far, far easier to talk about thinking in the new way, and even to dabble in it, than it is to fully enter this new way of knowing and being, living and loving. Bateson said, "Intellectually, I can stand here and I can give you a reasoned exposition of this matter. But if I am cutting down a tree, I still think Gregory Bateson is cutting down the tree. I am cutting down the tree. Myself is to me still an excessively concrete object, different from the rest of what I have been calling mind. The step to realizing, to making habitual the other way of thinking, so that one naturally thinks that way when one reaches out for a glass of water or cuts down a tree, that step is not an easy one. And quite seriously, I suggest to you that we should trust no policy decisions which emanate from persons who do not yet have that habit." Wow. If any of this makes sense, we should probably come to a full stop in our habitual mind. Can any of us meet this simple criterion of wise, loving, and beautiful action? In general, we all pursue conscious purposes in the way Bateson describes, the habitual way. Whatever we may say at an intellectual level, in simple terms, when we go to save the rainforest or to protest injustice or to improve our culture, our organization, our family, or our own soul, we do this from the conscious and also the largely unconscious perspective that I am doing this. In other words, if there were an AA-style group for most of humanity, it might be called Doers Anonymous, because we are addicted to the image of a doer, and we are addicted to doing things to solve our problems. But doing is the source of our problems, and can never be the solution except in a partial or fragmented way. After all, we see plenty of partial or relative success with that approach. It's just that all that partiality adds up to what we have today: a world hanging by a thread. Bateson indicates that genuinely wise action, genuine sanity, involves allowing ourselves to be more than a doer. This would mean liberating ourselves into larger ecologies of mind. And that's what we want when we start to talk about systems thinking, and sanity, and healing, and justice, and what all our talking fails to get us. Bateson cautions us in no uncertain terms here. He warns us that the ecological catastrophe arises from a style of thinking, a style of consciousness, one which people in governmental, NGO, sustainable business, activist groups, and more suffer from just as much as do oil executives, technologists, and financiers. If we want to help the world most effectively, if we want real healing, justice, resilience, and rejuvenation, we need to think in a new way. A way that presences a totally different style of consciousness, a different quality of experience. However great we think we have done so far in all of our history, personal and global, if we sense that we still have further to go, then we have to acknowledge the old philosophical insight that what got us here will not get us to where our fullest potential waits. How do we make this transition into new ways of thinking, better ways of knowing and being, living and loving? How do we transition into our greater potentials? How do we practice a mind of ecology that helps us live in more creative and vitalizing ecologies of mind? Though Bateson was a lifelong atheist, he acknowledged again and again that the religious, spiritual, and philosophical traditions of the world offer us insights and practices for entering into better ways of thinking, knowing, and being. The great philosophers and sages were considered wise for reasons we can now describe scientifically, and their insights constitute the single greatest untapped cultural resource for solving our personal and planetary problems. The solutions they offer are only now coming to light and receiving scientific validation and gradually a wider but tentative recognition. In a future video, we'll look at the most essential elements of these traditions that we need to begin working with if we want to help ourselves, each other, and the world without inadvertently perpetuating the pattern of insanity that got us into the problems we now face. Let's finish with the standard poisonous snake warning. You may have heard of Asclepius, the Greek god of healing. His images generally show him carrying a staff with a serpent winding its way upward. What kind of snake is that? If Asclepius were a philosopher, that snake would be poisonous. We must handle all serious philosophy the way we would handle a poisonous snake. Philosophy is meant to liberate and heal, but all philosophies can be turned into something decidedly unhelpful, to say the least. Science cannot escape philosophy. None of us can. And the ideas we discussed are inherently dangerous, mostly to our ego and to the current structures of injustice. Nevertheless, we need to watch our reactions and think things through with care. Philosophy is always about going past our beliefs and finding out things for ourselves.